Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, a podcast by MedComms experts. We share medical communications insights and advice from the best and brightest in the industry to find out what they're doing to push our industry forward. Here's your host, Wesley Portegies.
At the recent MAPS conference in New Orleans, digital engagement was front and center in many discussions. In this segment, we're joined by Alessandra Richardson, who presented on enhancing customer engagement and scientific communication, co-creating with stakeholders, and leveraging digital capabilities. Thanks for joining us, Alessandra.
Happy to be here, Wesley.
So I think you gave a really compelling presentation, and I would love to share some of those insights with our audience here from Transforming Medical Communications. So maybe to start off, there's of course quite a rapid evolution of digital channels. And I was wondering, what do you feel are the most significant shifts that you've observed in how medical affairs teams engage with HCPs and also with patients, perhaps digitally?
Sure. So as you mentioned, and as many of us know, there has been a rapid uptake of digital across medical affairs, especially since 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. And this has just accelerated. MLR compliance has become more comfortable with this environment. Medical affairs teams are taking more channel ownership. We're looking at our own medical social media handles and medical-only channels across the board. So it's really an exciting time if you're in medical communications and looking to get digital.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard you say social media. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think the top thing I heard at MAPS was that medical-owned LinkedIn channels are really the main area of focus for a lot of teams. Obviously, X has kind of gone by the wayside, whereas Facebook and Instagram tend to be still more commercial channels in terms of direct patient engagement. So LinkedIn seems to be where the HCPs are, where they want to seek their content, and where medical is trying to meet them.
Yeah, I've observed a few requests around this topic, and it's definitely interesting to see where we can take that. While we're at this topic, quick follow-up question. Any other channels that are social media related, maybe like more third-party platforms? Have you heard about anything of that as well?
Yeah, there was also discussion of Doximity and Sermo and platforms like that. I think they're great platforms to reach. I think they're just not attainable for all medical affairs budgets. That has been the main challenge. They're obviously optimal. I mean, they're closed HCP only social media platforms. They're a great place to be if you can afford it.
Yeah. I think the last part is kind of the crux there, right? Yeah. So in your presentation, we're also talking about the importance of co-creation with stakeholders. Could you maybe talk a little bit more around like maybe a successful example of how co-creating digital resources with patients has resulted in enhanced engagement?
Yeah, so recently EMD Serono launched our first patient and caregiver medical website, and that was co-created with patients and patient advocates. So in order to create that, we had an ad board up front where we gathered insights from the patient community on their information needs. And those insights were used to develop the initial website. And then once there was a beta site for them to view, we had a follow-up ad board to seek feedback and see if we were on track. So that was the patient co-creation piece. And then we also obviously worked very closely with our MLR compliance people to ensure that this would be a successful website launch and meet all of our compliance parameters.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about a few different audiences here. How I always like the term one size fits no one. How do you go about like addressing these varying needs from different audiences when it comes to digital communications?
It's a hard balance, right? Because a lot of times user experience and MLR compliance are at complete odds in terms of number of clicks to get to something or anything like that. So I think one of the best examples we have actually on our website is the chatbot. So we wanted it to be useful for patients, but still like not overpromising. And that's something that the patient said they wanted as well. They didn't want to have their expectations not met. So rather than it really being a chatbot, it's more of like a navigation tool. So it presents the questions that you can click on and get to. And so that kind of met both the compliance part of not over promising in a chatbot and not providing too much versus really still providing the utility to the patients and enhancing their user experience on the website.
I think that's really smart. You're basically like guiding their experience. but still giving them the ability to kind of interact with the content, if I understand it right, which I think is a very important part for people to engage with content and experience that level of engagement that we like to create in the digital channels.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm going to say one of my favorite words that we have been floating so many times over the last, I guess, maybe decade even, which is omnichannel. So we're speaking about the omnichannel, which is like a key element for successful digital engagement. So in your opinion, like what would you say are the foundational elements that medical affairs team should consider when they develop that digital omnichannel experience?
So the best way omnichannel has ever been described to me is the right message in the right place to the right audience at the right time. So that's just the simplest way I can understand it. And we obviously try to meet that. And then the other piece of omnichannel is the biggest challenge, I think, for medical affairs is really tying it all together on the back end. So we're really working to do that in terms of our metrics and kind of have central hubs that we're driving all of our omnichannel tactics to so that we can assess what channels are working, what aren't, and how we need to adjust.
So I'm kind of smiling a little bit while you give this answer because I get the question often like, well, which channel should we use, right? Do we want to do omnichannel? Which channel should we use? Which the answer is like, I think what you were describing is like all of them, but you need to understand how they tie together, right? And then the result of doing that is then often the internal alignment as well, right? Like if you look at the different medical affairs functions, how do they kind of come together? Because they typically own some of these channels, like, I don't know, like field medical and MedComms, MedEd. Like how do you all communicate together so you have a consistent experience from the outside in? Any thoughts on that, on how companies could organize themselves a little bit better to also have that internal alignment?
Yeah, so that's something we're actively exploring. I know some companies have mastered this sort of omnimetric that kind of incorporates all of these components from field medical to publication citations to like clicks on LinkedIn posts. So that way we can assess for a publication or for a post-Congress update, how did these channels interact and how well did it do according to our metric that understands what all the pieces we have internally are, as opposed to trying to benchmark against another company. You have no idea what their budget is. You have no idea what other channels they have. It's just impossible. It's apples to oranges. So I think that's something that I saw at MAPS through the Integrated Medical Communication Masterclass was that movement toward a central metric. And I think as companies start to develop those, it'll be a lot easier to quantify what's working and what's not.
Hey, we need your help. The best way to help us grow and reach more medical affairs professionals is to share with your community. If you love our podcast, please hit subscribe, leave us a review, and that way we can keep sharing insights from the best and brightest in the medical communications industry. Let's push our industry forward together. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you. So you also touched upon new website capabilities, right? So what are some key considerations that medical affairs should keep in mind when implementing these new digital tools, especially to make sure that they're actually valuable for the audience they're targeting?
Yeah, I think you said just the right thing. So you need to keep your audience in mind always. What level of tone are you using on your website? If it's an HCP website, it needs to be a certain tone. If it's a patient website, it needs to be a certain different tone. Both should be respectful. Then the other thing I think you need to keep in mind is how you're going to use this website, how people are going to learn about it. So one thing we kept in mind from the beginning of our medical website relaunch for HCPs was how we were going to use it in digital tactics and what our MLR teams were comfortable with. So we couldn't just design a website that we could not later then use for digital tactics, like not be able to link to this page because this page, it shows off-label stuff in this other area or pipeline stuff in this other area rather. So we really built the website with its later utility in mind. And I think that's really important to consider when you're starting a website. How will this ultimately be used? How do we do submissions currently? And how can we ensure that this will allow us to reach our audiences? Because if we can't reach our audiences, then it's just a complete waste of time and effort.
You're saying like you can define your target audience, but then before building anything, you should maybe try to figure out like, how do you know what their needs exactly are beyond perhaps channels, right? I see a lot of research attempts in this area where it says like, well, for instance, they like LinkedIn or something like that, right? And it's very like functionality or platform or channel oriented rather than the more in-depth Like, what is the fundamental need that these people have that we're trying to solve for, which can drastically, of course, inform how you develop your approach here, your website, for instance.
Yeah. And it can evolve too. Like that's the other thing is keeping up with all this stuff. Like LinkedIn, for example, most social media has gone into short form videos, TikToks, Reels, all of that. But LinkedIn is also shifting more towards those carousel type posts that are great for education. It's so important to be where your audience is and understand the content they want, but it's also important to stay up to date on it because that can evolve because we went through this whole renaissance in the last 5 years of all the short form videos are getting super popular, the TikToks, the Reels, the shorts. But now on LinkedIn, at least, it seems to be evolving to more of these carousel posts that are better for education. And so we can consider doing A/B testing. Maybe that's the right type of post for certain types of content. Maybe videos are still engaging for other types of content. Just really not being afraid to experiment and not being afraid to change as the platforms change as well.
Yeah, I like that, especially the experimenting part of it, because I think in medical affairs and MedComms, we spend a lot of time talking and thinking about what would work best without actually implementing anything, right? So I think doing smaller experiments and kind of looking at the metrics is an extremely powerful way to develop new ways that work better. And I also like how you mentioned the Instagram and YouTube shorts and these kind of things. I read somewhere that the average attention span has dropped from 50 to 8 seconds or something like that.
Oh my God.
And in our minds, right, we often like distinguish a little bit how we communicate or consume content personally from professionally. But of course, it is not that distinct, right? Like if you're a physician and in your spare time, you're on Instagram and you're used to like posts that you maybe spend 1-2 seconds per post on, it's not going to be much different in your professional life. Those things flow over to each other. And I think we should really leverage that kind of knowledge in our communications to kind of attune to that. That's how the modern world is. And that's where we should play into when we communicate or develop communication materials and resources. Alessandra, to close out this conversation here, what is the next frontier of the most promising opportunity for digital engagement in medical affairs, in your view?
Obviously, you can't talk about anything nowadays without AI. So I think with the advent of AI, there's going to be a lot more direct communication between medical affairs and the HCPs. There might be fewer field interactions. I think there could be a huge shift as everyone gets up to speed on how these tools get us information and how we need to process it once we are getting it faster from these different AI tools that are available. The role of medical affairs may shift in some way, maybe more to data generation focus as opposed to dissemination, because the dissemination would just be more automatic. I'm sure a lot of my medical affairs colleagues are terrified of that answer, but the future's unknown, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I see your point, and I actually agree with you. And I mean, like, I am the founder of a medical communications agency, right? So, of course, like, that's a topic that is very actual to me, how AI plays into the role. And my view is that I think it will help us becoming more effective communicating, right? So I think where a lot of resources, time, and budget was spent in the past is actually creating the materials. I think that is still extremely important, but I think we can likely save a lot of time doing that in the future, which then allows us to actually focus more on the parts where we can, I think, really win, making communications more effective, which is the more strategic part. A few things you have been calling out in this conversation, like really identify what your audience needs. What is their informational needs? How can we stay up to date on new communication methods and opportunities that present themselves by technological advancement? Like, I think we're kind of lacking a lot of the time and the budget currently to do so because we're very busy creating all the content. So I guess if anything, AI is going to help us there, lighten the load a little bit, and hopefully that then will help us becoming more effective. So I'm pretty excited about what it has to offer in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, these are some great insights, Alessandra. So thank you for sharing your perspective. And we'll continue exploring how the medical affairs leaders are navigating the digital shift together. I really appreciate you taking the time to be online with me here today and share your insights. And thank you for the amazing presentation at MAPS as well.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Transforming Medical Communications is brought to you by MedComms experts. To find out more about MedComms experts and how we create some of the most cutting-edge medical communications programs anywhere in the world, visit www.medcoms-experts.com. And then make sure to search for Transforming Medical Communications in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at MedComms Experts, thanks for listening.